The MSNBC studio felt more like a courtroom than a newsroom. Bright lights cut across the sleek glass desk, and the air vibrated with a tension no one even tried to hide. Mehdi Hasan sat perfectly still, fingers steepled under his chin, eyes locked on Jasmine Crockett as if he already knew she was about to drop something explosive. It wasn't just another interview. You could feel it. Even the production crew had stopped pretending to check their monitors. Jasmine adjusted her mic with a steady hand, her expression the same look she'd worn in 100 town halls, calm, unblinking, lethal. Mehdi spoke first. "Congresswoman Crockett, let's not waste time. You've accused the former administration of, in your words, criminal negligence in climate disaster response. What exactly do you mean by that?" She didn't hesitate. "I mean," she said, her voice steady enough to make the hairs on people's arms stand up, "that thousands of Americans died in storms and fires that were predictable, preventable, and treated like minor inconveniences by the man sitting in the Oval Office at the time." The studio went still. "Let's be very clear," Jasmine continued. "This isn't an act of God, it's an act of neglect. A choice. A conscious decision to pretend that climate science was a hoax because it was politically convenient." Mehdi nodded slowly. "You're referring to Hurricane Maria. The wildfires in California." "I'm referring to all of it," she said, her eyes locked on the camera. "Maria, Katrina's aftermath. Harvey, the rolling blackouts in Texas. And the fires that turned entire counties into cinders. How many Americans have to bury their families before we admit the truth?" Mehdi leaned in. "What truth?" "That we didn't just fail to prepare," Jasmine said, her voice dropping to something cold enough to make the control booth shiver. "We let it happen. And we told people it was their fault when they drowned or burned." A silence fell so total you could hear someone's pen clatter to the floor off camera. Jasmine didn't blink. "This country has a habit," she said, "of blaming working people for suffering engineered in boardrooms and signed into law by men who will never have to pick through the wreckage of their own homes." Mehdi didn't try to interrupt her. He knew better. And across America, millions of people leaned closer to their screens, knowing they were about to hear something no politician had ever dared say on live television. Jasmine took a breath, but she didn't look away from the camera. If anything, she looked straight through it, past the blinking lights and the polished set, into every living room where someone was still paying off flood damage, still coughing from wildfire smoke, still waiting for a FEMA check that never came. "You know what I'm tired of," she said, her voice calm, her words sharp enough to draw blood. "I'm tired of politicians who send thoughts and prayers while they get the funding for prevention, while they let corporations pump carbon into the air like it's their birthright." Mehdi glanced at his notes but didn't speak. The control room knew better than to cut her off. "I'm tired of watching entire neighborhoods burn because some rich developer didn't want to pay for fire-resistant infrastructure. And I'm tired of listening to the same men call it an act of God, like the science wasn't clear, like the maps weren't right there in front of them, year after year." She shifted forward, her elbows resting lightly on the desk. "Let's talk about Hurricane Maria since you brought it up. Let's talk about the thousands of bodies they tried to pretend weren't there, people who died because they were poor, because they were brown, because they didn't have the right zip code to matter." Mehdi cleared his throat. "Some would argue that natural disasters are inevitable." "No," Jasmine said, cutting him off without raising her voice. "Natural disasters are inevitable. Mass death is not." The line landed like a hammer. She went on, her voice tightening. "When Katrina hit, who died? When Maria hit, who died? When Harvey hit, who got rescued first and who got left behind? That is policy. That is choice." Her eyes never wavered. "And if you think it's going to get better while we keep electing men who call climate change a hoax, you're not paying attention." A hush fell over the studio. Even Mehdi, known for never letting a guest off the hook, looked like he didn't want to break the moment. Jasmine exhaled slowly. "This isn't about charity," she said. "It's about justice. And I'm done pretending they're the same thing." Across the country, you could almost feel the collective intake of breath, millions of people realizing they were hearing something they'd waited years to hear. And Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Mehdi finally found his voice, though it came out quieter than usual. You're accusing an entire administration of, what, indifference? Or something worse? Jasmine didn't hesitate. I'm accusing them of reckless disregard for human life. Her tone was measured, but her hands tightened on the edge of the desk. They knew. Every single briefing, every single climate report, ignored, buried, ridiculed. Not because they didn't understand the risk but because they didn't care who would pay the price. Mehdi leaned back, studying her face. You're talking about the Trump White House? She nodded once. And every lobbyist, every donor, every senator who lined up behind them to pretend we couldn't afford to act. You know what we can't afford? Another decade of this. For a moment, nobody in the studio moved. I was in Texas during the blackouts, Jasmine continued, her voice steady as she painted the memory. I saw families burn furniture to keep warm because the grid failed. I watched people melt snow in pots so they could flush toilets. And do you know what I heard on TV while that was happening? She tilted her head slightly, as if she could still hear the echo. We weren't prepared. No one could have predicted. Her laugh was short and bitter. We did predict it. Scientists, emergency managers, every person who's ever read a report about extreme weather. We predicted all of it. Mehdi tried to interject, but she kept going. And while people froze to death, the same politicians went on Fox News to call it a Democratic hoax. They stood in front of cameras and blamed green energy while Texans died in the dark. A flicker of anger finally broke through the composure in her eyes. That's not leadership. That's cowardice. Mehdi's next question came out hoarse. Congresswoman, what do you say to the families who are still waiting for help? Who feel like no one in Washington even knows they exist? Jasmine leaned in, her voice dropping to a hush that somehow made it more powerful. I say, I see you, she said. I see what this government did to you. And I swear to God, I am not going to stop saying your names until somebody pays attention. The word settled over the studio like a storm rolling in. And for a long moment, no one, not Mehdi, not the crew, not the millions watching, could look away. Jasmine's eyes never wavered. They held a kind of fury that wasn't loud but more dangerous for how contained it was, like a fire sealed behind glass, waiting to devour everything in its path. You know why this keeps happening? She asked, her voice low. Because the people writing the checks don't live in flood zones. They don't live next to chemical plants. They don't live in neighborhoods where the air already burns your lungs before the wildfire smoke rolls in. Mehdi said nothing. He knew better. And because when disaster hits, we let it become a spectacle, she went on. We run the same B-roll, families wading through waist-high water, roofs torn clean off, and then we forget them the second the cameras turn off. Her gaze shifted slightly, as if she were speaking to every person who'd ever watched the coverage with pity but no urgency. You know what it feels like to sit in a gymnasium with hundreds of your neighbors waiting to hear if FEMA's going to help you rebuild? You know what it feels like to explain to your child why the government decided your town wasn't worth saving? A sharp breath rippled through the audience behind the cameras. I have seen it, Jasmine said. I have looked into the faces of people who lost everything while billionaires wrote it off as a rounding error on their tax returns. Mehdi cleared his throat. You've said before that this is personal for you. She nodded once. It is. Her voice dropped again, almost gentle. When I was a kid, my mother worked 2 jobs. She still couldn't afford insurance that would cover the damage when our apartment flooded. We lost everything. Photos, clothes, furniture. And nobody came. Her hand lifted, palm open. That moment? That's when I learned how fast this country can look away. Mehdi's face softened, but she didn't give him a chance to pivot. And I am telling you right now, she said, her tone sharpening again, that what happened to us wasn't an accident. It was the logical outcome of decades of policy choices, choices that said some lives are expendable. The cameras closed in as Jasmine leaned forward. If you're watching this and you think you're safe because you live in a nicer neighborhood, let me be clear, the climate crisis does not care about your property values. The hush that followed was so absolute it felt like the room itself was listening. And in homes across America, people who'd never heard of Jasmine Crockett leaned closer to their screens, unable to look away. Mehdi let the silence stretch, because he knew no follow-up question could soften the impact of what she'd just said. But he still had a job to do. Congresswoman, he began carefully, some critics say you're politicizing tragedy, that it's unfair to lay blame for natural disasters at the feet of any one president. Jasmine didn't flinch. If anything, her expression only steadied, like she'd been waiting for that line all night. I'm not blaming a hurricane on Donald Trump, she said evenly. I'm blaming the death toll on him. The studio inhaled in one collective, startled breath. On him, and every Republican who stood behind him and voted down funding for climate resilience, she continued, her voice rising just enough to crack the hush. On every donor who bankrolled denial. On every lobbyist who wrote policy designed to protect profits while people drowned. Mehdi's eyebrows lifted. You understand that's going to make headlines. Good, Jasmine said, without a flicker of apology. Because if we can't say it out loud, then we're going to keep pretending it wasn't a choice. She leaned forward, her palms pressed flat to the glass desk. I'm tired of this country pretending there's no connection between the campaign checks and the body counts, she said. You can call that politicizing tragedy if it helps you sleep at night. But it's the truth. Mehdi swallowed, his throat working. And what do you say to people who still support him? Who believe he did everything he could? Jasmine's eyes locked on the camera, so direct it felt like she was speaking to each person individually. I say you deserve better, too, she said quietly. Because this isn't just about left and right. It's about whether we are going to be a country that values human life over fossil fuel profits. Over cheap headlines. Over the convenience of ignoring what's coming. Her voice softened, but her words only got heavier. You can love your country and still tell the truth about what it's done. For a heartbeat, the studio was silent. No one shifted. No one cleared their throat. It was the kind of pause that felt historic, even before the analysts could start spinning it. And Jasmine Crockett didn't look away. Mehdi exhaled slowly, as if he was trying to measure how far he could push before the conversation tipped from interview into indictment. Congresswoman, he said, his voice low, you've just accused the former president, and by extension, much of Congress, of gross negligence. What would accountability actually look like to you? Jasmine didn't hesitate. It looks like hearings, she said bluntly. It looks like subpoenas. It looks like the American people finally seeing the receipts, every suppressed report, every cancelled grant, every lobbyist's memo that said protecting profits was more important than saving lives. She lifted her chin, the lights catching the edge of her jaw. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, good. Because it should. Mehdi tilted his head, studying her face. And you believe that will change anything? She didn't blink. I believe nothing changes until you drag the truth into the light. Her voice steadied, almost soft. And if we don't, the next time it's not going to be one city losing power. It's going to be 10. The next storm won't take thousands, it will take tens of thousands. And we will look back on this moment, this decade, and realize we had every chance to act. Her hand closed slowly around her pen, as if she needed something to anchor her. I don't want to spend the rest of my life telling grieving families that it was nobody's fault. Because it is somebody's fault. Mehdi looked down at his notes, but it was obvious he was only stalling for breath. Some would say you're being alarmist. Jasmine's smile was faint, humorless. If the alarms are blaring, maybe it's time to stop calling people alarmist, and start calling them honest. A few producers in the control room shifted, whispering urgently into headsets, because they knew this clip was already destined to explode across every platform by morning. And let me be clear, Jasmine continued, her tone flattening into something final, this isn't just about Republicans. There are Democrats who took the same money and looked the other way. There are Democrats who let the same neighborhoods rot. She spread her hands, palms up, as if to say she was done pretending anyone's conscience was clean. This is bigger than a party. It's about whether we have the guts to face what we've done, and what we've failed to do. A silence fell so complete you could hear the soft hum of the studio lights overhead. And in that moment, millions of people watching felt a rare thing, someone telling the truth with no filter, no slogans, and no fear. For a few seconds, Mehdi didn't speak. His eyes flicked across the studio, searching for some cue that would tell him how to steer the conversation back to safe ground. But there wasn't any safe ground left. He cleared his throat. Congresswoman, what would you say to Americans who feel hopeless? Who see the fires, the floods, the blackouts, and believe nothing will ever change? Jasmine didn't rush her answer. She took a breath, her gaze dropping to the desk before lifting again to meet the camera. I'd say I understand, she began quietly. Because this system is built to exhaust you. To make you so tired, so discouraged, you stop asking why the same people always seem to walk away clean. Her eyes glinted, not with tears but with something harder, resolve. But I would also say this, hopelessness is exactly what they're counting on. They are betting that if they feed you enough distractions, enough cheap fights, enough fake scandals, you'll forget to look at the money. You'll forget to ask who profits when your town floods. Who gets richer when your power grid fails? She leaned forward, her tone gathering force. I have seen what happens when people decide they've had enough. When they show up to town halls and demand answers. When they vote out the same politicians who let them suffer. When they stop believing the lie that nothing can be done. Mehdi's voice was low, cautious. And you think that's possible now? Jasmine nodded once. I don't think it's possible, I know it is. Because every time a community rebuilds after a storm, every time a family refuses to leave their neighborhood behind, every time a kid grows up in a place the government wrote off and still stands up to run for office, that's proof. Her hand closed gently over the pen again. It's proof that the people who benefit from our despair haven't won yet. Mehdi tilted his head, studying her. If you could say one thing to the people watching tonight, especially the ones who've lost everything, what would it be? Jasmine took another breath, and for the first time, her voice almost cracked. I'd say, I see you, she said softly. I see how hard you fought to survive what should never have been your burden to carry. And you are not alone. Her eyes locked on the camera, steady as steel. And I swear to you, I will spend every day I have left in this job making sure the people who did this are never allowed to pretend it was inevitable. The words landed with the quiet finality of a verdict. No spin. No excuses. Just truth. Mehdi let the silence expand, honoring it instead of rushing to fill it with another question. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than the millions watching were used to hearing. Congresswoman, he said, you've talked a lot tonight about accountability. About pulling back the curtain. But let me ask you. Why do you think so many Americans, even ones who know the science, still don't believe this crisis is real? Jasmine didn't hesitate. Because denial is easier than grief, she said simply. She let the words settle before she continued. It is easier to believe that climate change is a hoax than to face the truth, that the world you grew up in is disappearing. That the institutions you trusted have failed. That the same politicians you voted for took the money and looked the other way. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The calmness made it cut deeper. And it's easier to blame your neighbor. To blame immigrants. To blame the poor. To say, They should have moved instead of asking why we keep rebuilding the same broken systems over and over again. Mehdi nodded, absorbing every word. Do you think, he asked carefully, that there's still time to change course? Jasmine's eyes stayed locked on the lens. There is, she said. But not if we keep pretending incremental half measures are going to save us. Not if we keep electing cowards who would rather watch us burn than lose a donor. Her hand lifted, palm open as if she was laying something on the table between them. I'm not here to offer comfort, she said. I'm here to tell the truth. And the truth is, every year we wait, every policy we water down, every lie we tolerate, it all adds up. She drew a quiet breath. One day, your town is going to be the one on fire. Your lights are going to be the ones that go out. And if you don't care until it's your house on the news, it will already be too late. A chill rippled through the studio. You could feel it even through the screen. Mehdi swallowed, looking briefly away. When he met her gaze again, there was no challenge left in it, just the solemn understanding that she had said what needed saying. And she still wasn't done. For a moment, the studio lights felt almost too bright, like they were illuminating something everyone had tried not to see. Mehdi drew in a careful breath. Congresswoman, he said, some viewers are probably thinking you sound angry. Jasmine's mouth curved into the faintest smile. Good, she said. A few producers exchanged glances behind the cameras, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let her keep going. I am angry, Jasmine continued, her voice low and clear. I'm angry because this didn't have to happen. Because we had warnings, decades of them, and we ignored every single one. Her gaze swept the lens, unflinching. I'm angry because the same people who made fortunes off fossil fuels will never stand in a relief line or watch their kids cough up ash. Her hand lifted just enough to emphasize each word. I'm angry because they still have the nerve to look into a camera and call this a hoax while Americans bury their families. Mehdi didn't interrupt. He didn't dare. And if that makes me sound too emotional for some people, then I have a question for them. She leaned in, her voice tightening. When did we decide that the only acceptable response to mass death was polite detachment? Her words fell into the hush like a stone dropped in water. I will not apologize for caring, she said. I will not apologize for grieving. And I will not apologize for demanding that this country do better. Mehdi let out a quiet exhale. If you could look every skeptic, every politician, every CEO in the eye right now, what would you say to them? Jasmine paused, her gaze locking on the camera with an intensity that felt almost like a challenge. I'd say, one day, history is going to ask where you stood, she said softly. And if you think your grandchildren are going to admire your excuses, you're mistaken. The words didn't come out as a threat. They came out as something simpler, and far harder to deflect. A fact. And when that day comes, she continued, I hope you remember this moment. I hope you remember every chance you had to do something and chose not to. Her voice steadied, final. Because you don't get to pretend you didn't know anymore. You know. We all know. The studio was silent. The network was silent. And across the country, millions of people sat frozen, feeling something that looked a lot like clarity. Jasmine didn't look away from the camera. She didn't fidget, didn't soften her expression. She just let the moment breathe, as if daring everyone watching to look away first. Mehdi cleared his throat, his voice almost reverent now. Congresswoman Crockett, I have to ask, what keeps you fighting, after everything you've seen? Her reply came without hesitation. Because I still believe this country is worth fighting for, she said. A beat. The kind that makes people hold their breath without realizing it. Because I still believe in the people who show up to rebuild after every storm, who open their homes to strangers, who don't need a camera pointed at them to do the right thing. Her voice gentled, but her eyes stayed fierce. I believe in the teachers who turn school gyms into shelters. In the nurses who stay when the evacuation buses leave. In the kids who grow up knowing their neighborhoods were written off, and decide to run for office anyway. She took a breath, steady as ever. But believing in them doesn't mean pretending everything is fine. It means telling the truth about who has failed them, and refusing to let that failure be the last word. The control room was dead silent. Even the floor director had stopped gesturing. "So if you hear my voice tonight," Jasmine said, her tone wrapping around the lens like something you couldn't escape, "I hope you remember this." She leaned in, her final words low and certain. "This isn't an act of God. It's an act of neglect. And if we have the courage to name it, we have the power to change it." Mehdi didn't try to follow. He just let the cameras roll as the moment settled into something that felt bigger than any headline. And across America, on laptops, in diners, in quiet living rooms, people felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. A reason to believe the truth still mattered. When the lights in the studio dimmed and the final credits rolled, Jasmine Crockett didn't rush to leave her seat. She sat there, hands folded, eyes steady, as if she knew this moment wasn't really ending here. Because the truth she'd just spoken wasn't a soundbite, it was a reckoning. A reckoning for every leader who turned disaster into a talking point. A reckoning for every corporation that treated human life like a line item. A reckoning for every comfortable cynic who told Americans that fighting for something better was naive. Tonight, she had made it clear, the era of polite excuses was over. Jasmine didn't come to MSNBC to perform. She didn't come to soften the blow or offer empty comfort. She came to remind this country that we can't fix what we refuse to name. And if her words sounded too raw, too direct, too uncompromising, good. Because the stakes are too high for anything less. So as millions of people replay this interview, share it with their friends, and argue about it at kitchen tables, one truth will keep echoing louder than the rest. This isn't an act of God. This is an act of neglect. And we are the ones who decide whether it ever happens again. If you felt that in your bones tonight, don't let it fade. Remember it. Repeat it. Act on it. Because the truth still matters. And so do the people living it.